So, in my last post, I talked about a lot of things. R-rated movies, comics being made for kids, Alan Moore, The Thing. Bet you didn't see that one. But the place I left that post was that to satisfy the need for R-rated superhero movies and TV and not make the characters feel grotesque, as Alan Moore put it, I stated that the solution was new characters or indie comics. And when I finished the post, I posted a poll on my story asking people what they thought about this. And I realized that opinions on this were more mixed than I thought. Most people said that they were cool with R-rated superhero films and TV, on whether they would enjoy an R-rated piece of media based on characters that were originally created for children. Some people said they prefer to stick to the comics, that a faithful adaptation was more important. Some people are interested in seeing a different perspective, or sort of reimagining of the characters. Some people want there to be a real reason for it to be R-rated, sort of help the story, and isn't just there for the sake of it. And some people want Herbert. So there's all these answers along the spectrum, but the next question I asked kind of messed up my whole post I had just written. You see, at the end of the post, I claimed that the way to solve this hunger for R-rated superhero media is through indie comics, and I thought most people would agree with me. I was wrong. It was very mixed. I thought it would be like 70-30 or 80-20, but it was like, at the time of recording, 55-46. So that means I now have to convince people that indie comics are the way to go. So this is my plea on why. So let's talk about indie comics. We need to define what that means, right? When I talk about indie comics, I mostly mean stuff that isn't Marvel or DC, independent from them. And I know there's people that really read comics and they're scoffing right now, talking about some.
Oh, actually, the indie comics are bad.
It's my definition, okay? Listen, there's probably like 100 independent comics that I have never read and I don't know, and I will never read. But this is my. But I'm on your side. I'm on your side, okay? It's just the way my brain works. Something that's from an independent label, that's indie to me. Marvel and DC has decades, in fact almost a century of lore, hundreds of thousands of characters, and most of the time I see that as an advantage because on one hand you have all these rich characters with hundreds of writers and illustrators, all these different types of stories, so there's essentially something for everyone. On the other hand, when someone adapts one of these characters, it's harder to say what is accurate to the comics and what isn't, because so much has changed over the years. Arguably, the Adam West Batman show and movie is the most comic accurate Batman adaptation, because at the time, that's kind of what Batman comics look like. There's so much lore that if you want to write a good story that the fans will like, you have to make sure that you stay faithful to the core of that character in most instances. To illustrate my point, I'm once again bringing in the opinion of one, yeah, you guessed it, say it with me. No, really, stop, listen, stop whatever you're watching, say it with me. Everyone together, 3, 2, 1, Alan Moore. So besides all the weird shit that Alan Moore does, the thing he's most well known for is writing Watchmen. Now here's the thing. Moore is written for characters with existing lore before. I mean, he literally wrote what is considered to be one of the most influential or best Batman comics of all time. But he almost immediately regretted it, citing,
I never really liked my story in The Killing Joke. I think it put far too much weight on a character that was never meant to carry it. It was too nasty, too physically violent.
Now I know what I said about indie comics at the start. I know that Watchmen is a DC Comics property, but all this is to illustrate the point that some of Moore's best work came from characters that people had no anticipation for. With this new world that had never been seen before, he was able to explore interesting and more adult themes without having to worry about whether one of the characters was going to be on a kid's lunchbox. Now, of course, that was going to happen at some point. We do live in a society, after all. But the message with Watchmen is never muddied up, because most of the characters at the time were only in 12 issues or less. You know exactly who they are, what their deal is. At least in 1986, there wasn't any comics before or after. And the reason it's still revered today is because it wasn't just mature and real for the sake of it. Watchmen, if you don't know, is about if superheroes were real, and not just like Dark Knight real. I'm talking about like actually real. In the Watchmen universe, superheroes are seen as kind of pathetic. Many times in the comics, characters will talk about how stupid it is to be a superhero and how dressing up and physically fighting criminals doesn't actually do anything. Most of the reason it's considered to be for adults isn't because it's violent or gory. It's actually the opposite. Most of the reason it's considered a mature graphic novel for adults is because of the other aspects: sex, language, reference to drugs. My point being, Watchmen uses its mature tag to show you how stupid superheroes would be in real life. And if they were real, things wouldn't be the same as our world. It would be drastically different. It uses what you know about comics and superheroes and then flips it to show you a new side to the argument. But let's be honest, Watchmen is a little bit outdated at this point. The original comic was about nuclear holocaust and the Cold War, and that's not really relevant today, I hope. So we should have a new R-rated comic book that actually does something with its R-ratedness.
I know you're trying to be tough, but we're superheroes. Who are you?
I think Amazon's The Boys caught a lot of people by surprise. Besides being gory in a way that a lot of us hadn't seen before, it was actually a step up from the comics. It took characters and some storylines but made them actually relevant and not completely gross. There's a lot that happens in that show that is exactly what people like to indulge in. People get maimed, gutted, literally ran through. There's a weird religious cult. There's a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has no regards for its employees and covers up all scandals through bullying politicians into doing their bidding. But anyway, it puts forward that in this day and age, the idea that there would be a whole industry around superheroes and that the biggest corporations in the world would use them to further their own goals is probably pretty realistic. And I think by doing this, it can indulge in all the R-rated gore they want, because shit, people would be randomly exploding if superheroes with god complexes were running around with no concern, but also have really clever satire. It's R-rated for a really, really good reason. So what if you don't want all that meta commentary about society? Well, I have the right superhero for you, and his name is... The most recent entry in Amazon's superhero collection is Invincible, based on the indie comic from 2003 of the same name. The show looks and feels like any other animated superhero show. A lot of people who I spoke to who weren't familiar with the comics actually thought it was meant for kids because of the way it was animated. And I'll be honest, I did too. It puts you in a place of familiarity by introducing you to what is basically the Justice League, right down to a Martian Manhunter equivalent being called Martian Man. There's a Darkwing, a War Woman, even a Red Rush. It's all very obvious who these characters are supposed to be, and we see them. We assume, oh, these are the superheroes we'll be following. Everything in the show is going as we expected until that final 15 minutes. And I'm about to spoil it, so if you haven't seen the show, jump to this time code. The way I see it, the show essentially tricks you through its characters and art style, telling you that this is going to be like every other animated superhero show, but it consistently subverts that. In the end battle, for example, our assumption is that at this point, they'll have their supervillain battle through the city, knock down a couple buildings, and that'll be the end of it. But Invincible uses its R rating to exemplify what we don't see in other superhero TV shows and movies. We don't usually expect to see the human perspective. But by the very nature of the story, the show chooses to show us the power that the main character has, using the gore to illustrate that point. Listen, here's the thing. These things that I talked about in this video aren't perfect. Watchmen, for how great its writing is, for some characters, doesn't really do that much for other characters. The Boys, for all of its excellent commentary, kind of gets diminished because it's literally owned by Amazon. And Invincible is cool, but the animation and some of the character writing leaves something to be desired. There are so many many other adaptations of indie comics, from film to TV, all varying levels of quality, all with each of their own dedicated fan bases, and most of them are interesting premises, different takes on different genres. I can list like 10 off the top of my head. Kingsman, Kick-Ass, Hellboy, Jupiter's Legacy, End of the Fucking World, Lock and Key, Wanted, Oblivion, Snowpiercer, The Crow. Have I seen all of these? No, but I do know they're pretty different from each other. While not all of them are R-rated, and while not all of them are superheroes, they are fairly interesting ideas because they create new stories and new characters, which is way more interesting than imposing these serious, gritty themes on characters that were never meant to face them. And when I say this, I mean actually serious themes. There are amazing film and TV like Superman the Animated Series, Spider-Man 2, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. All three of the films and TV shows that I listed are made for children and explore mature themes. The difference between this and other stuff is that this never feels exploitative or romanticized. TV shows like Batman the Animated Series have episodes that have won Emmys for writing. But I know that some of you still aren't convinced, so now that we know that you can explore mature themes with characters made for children, let's look at Identity Crisis. Identity Crisis is a 7-issue comic starring such characters as Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Zatanna. In the story, Elongated Man's wife, Sue Dibney, is murdered, and it's revealed that years before the story is set, Dr. Light had raped her, and the Justice League agreed to wipe their minds so that everyone forgot about it. And here's the thing. I remember watching the comic story and video about this comic and kind of liking it. I used to think this was edgy and cool because I wanted the superheroes that I looked up to be gritty and adult like I wanted to be. I look back on it and realize it's so unnecessarily edgy and dark, and the story only uses the veil of being real and gritty, using things like cover-up and sexual assault to give that illusion. It never actually addresses the trauma from the perspective of the victim, but rather how everyone else felt. It's not effective in any way and has a pretty terrible conclusion too. It takes characters like the Flash and Superman and the Atom and Batman, characters that were specifically created and marketed towards kids, and tries to haphazardly put them within the confines of a story that they were never created for. Now, obviously, this is a very big extreme. Identity Crisis has not aged well for many, many reasons. But even at the time, it was probably seen as a huge departure from popular comics like JLA that had come before it. But I do think that the other R-rated or serious adaptations of characters like these are kind of embarrassed more than anything. They want to be taken so seriously without much thought. They throw in adult themes and senseless violence with no real reason for actually doing so. In an attempt to create something like Batman the Animated Series, they end up making an identity crisis. To reference the Alan Moore quote that I included in my last post, making children's entertainment suddenly adult makes it kind of grotesque. I'm not trying to say not to enjoy R-rated Batman, because like I mentioned in the last post, I actually am excited to see what Matt Reeves, the Batman, will turn out like. However, I'm hoping that the violence in the movie and the way it's portrayed helps the story and isn't just there because it looks cool. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Hopefully you have learned something, and if you haven't, then I've wasted my time. Thank you to Sam, who made the cover for my last post, and to Josh, who voiced Alan Moore. You see that works well because they're both unhinged artists, and thank you for watching. Bye.